quiet stretch of land just 45 minutes from Manhattan, serene, isolated, and hiding a terrifying secret. In December 2010, a Suffolk County canine team searching for a missing woman stumbled upon something far more sinister: the skeletal remains of 4 women, each wrapped in burlap, discarded just off Ocean Parkway near Gilgo Beach. They would become known as the Gilgo 4. Over the months that followed, more bodies were discovered, 10 sets of human remains in total. Most were young women, many of them sex workers. A serial killer, it seemed, had been stalking the margins of society. And for more than a decade, the case would stall. For the victims' families, justice appeared to be just out of reach until a sudden breakthrough in July of 2023. A man, hiding in plain sight, an architect, a father, a commuter from Massapequa Park, and, according to prosecutors, a killer. This is the story of the Long Island serial killer investigation, the missteps, the turning points, the evidence, and the man now accused, Rex Heuermann. To understand how this case unfolded, we turn to 2 journalists who have spent years following it from different vantage points. Alexis Linkletter is a Long Island-raised and Los Angeles-based true crime documentary producer, investigative journalist, and television host. With roots in both Long Island and the world of investigative storytelling, she's spent years chasing answers in this case. Her work includes Unraveled, the Long Island Serial Killer, a podcast and docuseries that exposed systematic failures in the investigation and gave a voice to the victims' families. Mary Murphy is an Emmy Award-winning journalist with 40 years of experience covering New York's most high-profile cases. She spent 12 years reporting on the Gilgo Beach murders before covering the arrest of Rex Heuermann in July 2023 and continues her on-the-ground reporting today. A Queens native, Mary spent decades as a TV reporter and now continues her work in digital reporting at marymurphyofficial.com. Both Alexis and Mary bring us their insights, not just into what happened, but why it took so long to get there. The case of the Long Island serial killer didn't start with a murder investigation. It started with a missing person search. In May of 2010, 23-year-old Shannan Gilbert from Jersey City, New Jersey, disappeared after visiting a client she met on Craigslist in the gated community of Oak Beach on Long Island.
Shannan Gilbert was driven to the neighborhood of Oak Beach by her driver, a guy named Michael Pack. And she arrived to meet with a client, a guy named Joseph Brewer. Something over the course of the night spooked her, and she ended up running from Joseph Brewer's house through the neighborhood, and her driver was unable to find her. During that time, she made a 23-minute-long 911 call.
State Police, Trooper Fry. State Police.
Yeah, there's somebody after me.
I'm sorry?
There's somebody after me.
Where are you?
There's somebody after me.
Okay, where are you?
There's somebody after me.
Where are you, ma'am?
I don't know.
You're driving right now?
No, I'm inside the house.
I'm sorry?
I'm inside the house.
What house?
I don't know. Can you trace where I am?
I'm sorry?
Can you trace where I am?
No, I can't. What's your callback number you're calling from?
Huh?
What phone number are you calling from?
Somebody's after me. Please.
What's the matter? Are you okay?
What are you going to do? What are you going to do to me?
She's in his house on my...
Why?
Huh? Well, I don't know. But it was transferred to me.
Why?
No.
What are you going to tell me?
To this day, it's unclear why she was screaming. Some police have speculated that she kind of fell down the steps of the house when she was trying to get away. And then Shannan went and banged on other doors, and one man opened the door, and he just said she was very out of sorts, and she said she was, fearful of her life, but then she kept running.
What's the matter? Are you okay?
What are you going to do? What are you going to do to me?
She's in his house on my...
Why?
Huh? Well, I don't know. But it was transferred to me.
Why?
No.
Are you gonna tell me?
From the beginning, there were problems because initially when the 911 call came in and Shannan Gilbert wasn't quite sure where she was, she may have said Jones Beach. And so then the operator sort of put over the call to the state police because that would, the state police would be in charge of some kind of a beach or a state park.
So the state police went instead of the Suffolk County Police Department. And by the time they got there, she was gone. She was missing for a number of days before anyone started making any real noise. And that noise was Shannan Gilbert's mom, Mary Gilbert. But there was no news coverage. There was no reporting on this yet. Just a worried mom screaming for help and finding her daughter. Now, the search for Shannan sort of continued. The police did try to look for her. There were a lot of question marks about what happened. In December of 2010, an officer is conducting what they refer to as a training exercise / search, residual search for Shannan Gilbert along Ocean Parkway, right near where Gilgo Beach is. And it's then that Blue, this cadaver dog, essentially discovers a set of human remains. And this officer, John Malia, is thinking, okay, this is Shannan Gilbert. This is the woman that we've been keeping an eye out for. But immediately they discover that it is not Shannan Gilbert. It is Melissa Bartholomew.
Melissa Bartholomew was 24 years old when she was last seen on July 12, 2009, in the basement apartment where she lived in the Bronx, according to the Suffolk County Police. After graduating from cosmetology school, Bartholomew left Buffalo, New York, in search of work opportunities and began working as an escort. The night she disappeared, she told a friend she was meeting a man and would return in the morning. Her mother reported her missing 6 days later on July 18th. Cell phone records showed activity after her disappearance in Manhattan, as well as in Freeport, Massapequa, and Lindenhurst on Long Island. Then, in the weeks that followed, the calls began. In July and August 2009, Bartholomew's phone was used by a man who taunted her family with a series of disturbing messages. "Do you think you'll ever see her again?" he asked her younger sister on August 26, according to the family's attorney. "You won't. I killed her," he said, and hung up. In another call, the man described in graphic detail what he had done sexually to Bartholomew. "I still don't sleep through the night thinking about all of it," her mother, Lynn Bartholomew, told reporters in 2011. She said she kept a notebook with every detail she learned about the case and stayed in close contact with the families of other victims. A large-scale search eventually discovered 3 additional bodies. Maureen Brainerd Barnes was 25 years old when she was last seen alive on July 9th, 2007. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, she'd been threatened with eviction, putting her at risk of losing custody of her child. It was that fear that pushed her to travel to New York City, where she was working as an escort. The day of her disappearance, she had called a friend in Connecticut where she lived and said she had an out call, according to Suffolk County Police. 5 days later, on July 14th, a friend reported her missing to the Norwich Police Department. Her remains were discovered more than 3 years later on December 13th, 2010, on the north side of Ocean Parkway. Her sister, Melissa Kahn, told reporters in 2011 that she had spent years trying to piece together what happened, poring over Maureen's emails and phone records and staying in contact with other victims' families. Kahn described her sister as a loving mother, sister, and friend. She said Maureen had worked a seasonal telemarketing job and had turned to escort work out of desperation, unemployed, and facing eviction. Maureen would never get the chance to show the world how talented she was, her sister said. "My family will never get the chance to know who Maureen could be today because her life was tragically taken." Megan Waterman, age 22, from Maine, was last seen by her family on June 6, 2010, boarding a Concord Trailways bus bound for New York, according to Suffolk County Police. Waterman, who had turned to sex work as a way to support her young daughter, left the Holiday Inn Express on Long Island on June 6 to meet a client, according to police. When she failed to return, her family, who had been caring for her daughter, reported her missing on June 8th. They said it was unlike her to go so long without checking in. 6 months later, on December 13th, 2010, Waterman's body was found near Gilgo Beach. At one point, her family worked with a team of private investigators funded by a nonprofit human rights organization in an effort to find her. Dottie Laster, a member of that team, told reporters in 2011 that Waterman had once sounded starstruck when she called her mother to say some of her clients were doctors, lawyers, and law enforcement officers. Megan was loved by a lot of people, says her aunt Elizabeth Messerve, and this affected a lot of lives. Amber Lynn Costello, age 27, was living with her friends in West Babylon, Long Island when she vanished on September 2nd, 2010. She struggled with a heroin addiction and, according to Suffolk County Police, worked as an escort to support her habit. She was last seen leaving her residence to meet a client. At that time, she didn't have a cell phone with her. Her remains were found on December 13th, 2010, near Gilgo Beach. Witnesses told investigators that the client she went to meet had been to the home before. They described him as a large white male, approximately 6'4" to 6'6" in height, wearing big oval-style glasses. One witness said the man resembled an ogre. Costello's sister, Kim Overstreet, told reporters in 2011 that she placed an ad urging other escorts to come forward with any information about threatening clients. "What happened to Amber eats at me every day," Overstreet said at the time. "Finding out who did this consumes me. I stay up all night doing research and trying to retrace her steps." The bodies of the 4 victims, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello, were found approximately 500 feet from each other, and they would later be dubbed the Gilgo 4. Other than the location where they were discovered, what other similarities did these women have that the media started to highlight?
The women were very petite for the most part, and they were bound. 3 of them were bound with burlap. And for years, we thought it was burlap you would use in landscaping. We didn't find out until the arrest of the suspect that it was camouflage burlap that you might use in duck hunting. So 3 of the women were bound with this camouflage burlap in different parts of their bodies, around the head, the midsection, and their legs. And then one of them, Maureen Brainerd Barnes, was bound with belts in 3 parts of her body. When we first found out their identities, we found out that for the most part, they were advertising their services on Craigslist. That was sort of the headline when they were first identified. Oh, these victims advertised on Craigslist, which you can advertise any kind of service on Craigslist. Some of them, we later learned, used sites like Backpage.com to advertise as escorts.
Just all of these horrible, dehumanizing, defiling language was being used. And law enforcement was using it too. Early press conferences show that this kind of language was being used when officers in charge were trying to mobilize, subordinate officers to work on this case. And there's a lot of issues with this kind of language. It really hinders a sense of urgency.
The families were very concerned that because these young murder victims were sex workers, they wouldn't get the same respect or attention that someone else might get.
The similarities between the victims, their work, the way their bodies were wrapped, their proximity to one another were impossible to ignore. There was no question to authorities they now had a serial killer on their hands. But the horror didn't stop with the discovery of the Gilgo 4.
These 4 women are found in December of 2010. It's really cold out. The police want to continue searching along Ocean Parkway, but the conditions make it very difficult. But the searches resume in April of 2011, and that's when they start discovering additional remains, but in completely different condition than the 4 first victims. They're finding dismembered remains, appendages. They find a female toddler. So this is really when the media firestorm ensues and blows up. And then the controversy begins. Is this 1 killer or 2 killers?
In total, 10 sets of human remains were discovered along Ocean Parkway between 2010 and 2011. For years, the case stagnated. Although the FBI had previously assisted in the search for victims, it was never officially a part of the investigation. In fact, they were actively blocked from joining. The man behind that, then police chief James Burke.
I'm sure those who follow the case closely know there was a component of police corruption involved in the early stages of the Long Island serial killer investigation.
Dominic Verone was the chief of detectives the first year of the Gilgo Beach investigation. And then at the end of 2011, around the time that Shannan Gilbert's body was discovered, there was a whole regime change in Suffolk County. A new county executive was elected, and then he would have the choice of new people for his administration. And interestingly enough, instead of choosing a police commissioner first, he chose the chief of police first. And that man that he chose was Chief James Burke.
He started with the department in 1986, and in the early 90s was when he already started having reports of misconduct, which included encounters with sex workers while he's on the job, in uniform, in his police car. And these were all being documented by Internal Affairs. So the question then became, why is it that this man continues to be promoted above other candidates who don't have any of these infractions on their records?
The way he was connected to some of the big politicians in Suffolk County started when he was about 13 years old. He lived out in Smithtown, Long Island, which is in Suffolk County. And there were a group of boys that ended up being arrested for the murder of another boy who was only 13. His name was John Pius. He suffered a horrible death. He was killed behind a school. Stones were stuffed down his throat. The investigation, that was troubled also because they were having a hard time finding the right suspects. And eventually, James Burke became the star witness in that case and pointed the finger at some of his friends. And the prosecutor who was on the case, decades ago, when James Burke was only about 13, was Tom Spoda.
Tom Spoda, back then in 79, was a budding prosecutor, a very ambitious young prosecutor. And he basically won this case with James Burke's star testimony. That kind of put Tom Spoda on the map as a DA hopeful. And he would ultimately become the DA after a number of years.
And many believe, was the mentor to James Burke. He had made James Burke the lead investigator in his office.
So he pivots away from the Suffolk County Police Department. He moves to the DA's office, which is when he's given more power and more access. Right around the time that Shannan Gilbert's body is found in Oak Beach is when James Burke is appointed police chief. And that appointment happens as a result of the county executive, a man named Steve Ballone, who later would say that he was coerced and pressured to appoint James Burke despite having all of these infractions on his record. When he's appointed abruptly, what happens is he fires everybody who was there before, including, the chiefs of the homicide division. His name was Dominic Verone. He was in charge of the homicide investigation of Gilgo Beach killer, Long Island serial killer to that point. James Burke comes into power and he fires him and doesn't even sit down to debrief to discuss the status of the investigation. So basically, they start back at zero.
When Chief Burke came in, people were surprised that he was chosen as the chief of department. And then it just seemed like we weren't hearing much about Gilgo Beach anymore or the investigation. And I do have to say that in 2012, which was the first year of Chief Burke as the leader of the department, we had Hurricane Sandy. We call it Superstorm Sandy. And that devastated many parts of Long Island, as well as New Jersey and parts of New York City. So sometimes you have to wonder, was that a factor in the investigation slowing down? A lot of people believe that it's not the main factor. A lot of people believe that Chief Burke didn't want any part of the FBI nosing around Long Island because he didn't want the FBI to know what he and his pals were doing.
There are reports and witnesses have come forward saying that James Burke himself was engaging in attending sex parties in the neighborhood of Oak Beach when he was working at the DA's office in 2009, right before the bodies are discovered. So the idea that this law enforcement official would be engaging in this kind of behavior in this area where literally within, there's only a handful of houses in this neighborhood where Shannan Gilbert disappeared from and where the bodies would be found nearby, you start to understand why he might not want the FBI poking around.
For years, there wasn't that much news about Gilgo Beach. And then all of a sudden, there's a new district attorney that was elected at the end of 2021, Ray Tierney. And a new police commissioner came in who used to be the chief of detectives and chief of department in New York City, NYPD. His name is Rodney Harrison.
In early 2022, Suffolk County Police Commissioner Rodney Harrison formed an interagency task force with investigators from the FBI as well as state and local police departments aimed at solving the case using technology and tools that weren't available a decade earlier.
So it's my understanding, and the name of the officer has not been released. It's my understanding that it's a female officer of the state police who basically decided to look at the case file tied to Amber Lynn Costello. Now, she is the only one of the victims who lived on Long Island in Babylon, which is not far from Ocean Parkway. And when she went missing in 2009, there was a really interesting story tied to her disappearance. Basically, her roommate was able to give law enforcement a description of one of Amber's clients who they thought might be the last person to have seen Amber alive.
This client, he said, looked like an ogre. He was really big, about 6'4", 6'5". And he acknowledged that they tried to rip off this client by taking his money and then not providing the services. This roommate came in and pretended to be a boyfriend, and he kicked the guy out. So this client got very mad, sent a text to Amber Costello that said, "That was not so nice. Do I get credit?" Apparently, he offered her a lot of money. The next day, she went out to his car, left her phone behind, and she was never seen again.
Dave Schaller, the roommate, saw Amber leave in a 2002 green Chevy Avalanche with the man who he believed he saw the day before.
The state police already knew they were working with this area in Massapequa Park, Long Island, as a potential place of interest. Years before, the FBI had figured out that some of the phones that were of note in this case pinged in Massapequa Park, Long Island, and also pinged in Midtown Manhattan near the railroad station. So they figured this guy, this suspect, may commute between Midtown Manhattan and Massapequa Park. Anyway, they started looking up Chevy Avalanches, first generation, that may be registered in Massapequa Park. And they found a name, and that name was Rex Heuermann. And then when they did surveillance, they saw that he was a really big guy. He was hulking, and they said, this may be our guy.
In July 2023, more than a decade after the first bodies were discovered, Rex Heuermann, a Manhattan architect, was arrested and charged in connection with the murders of 3 of the Gilgo 4, Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. 6 months later, in January of 2024, a 4th charge followed for the murder of Maureen Brainerd Barnes. In June 2024, after months of combing through evidence seized from the family home, investigators filed 2 more murder charges against Heuermann. One was for the 2003 killing of Jessica Taylor, a 20-year-old who worked in the inner city with children at a summer camp as an aide. At the time of her disappearance in July of 2003, she was a sex worker in New York City. Her partially dismembered remains were found in July 2003 in the wooded area of Manorville. Then, 8 years later, additional body parts were discovered in Gilgo Beach. In a statement made after additional charges were announced, her mother, Elizabeth Baskiel, described Taylor as loving and compassionate. She loved to make people laugh. She could always make people laugh, Baskiel said. She loved kids and loved working with them. It's a tragedy that she never had children. Jessica would have made a great mother. The second charge dated back even further. Sandra Castilla was 28 when she went missing in 1993. Originally from Trinidad and Tobago, she had been living in New York before her disappearance. Police referred to her as a drifter. Though her last known address was in Queens, investigators believed she was not living there at the time of her death. Her body was discovered that November by hunters in a wooded area of North Sea, Southampton. While authorities never confirmed whether Castilla had engaged in sex work, they described her lifestyle as substantially similar. Then in December of 2024, the list of victims grew once more. Heuermann was charged with the murder of 24-year-old Valerie Mack. Born Valerie Kinn Fulton in Atlantic City, New Jersey, Mack spent much of her early life in foster care before being adopted by the Mack family. She later moved in with a relative in Wildwood and began traveling between New Jersey and Philadelphia. Starting in the mid-1990s, she had several prostitution-related arrests in Philadelphia. According to investigators, she advertised her services online using the alias Melissa Taylor, though she was also known to streetwalk. Her dismembered remains were first discovered in November of 2000 by a hunter in a wooded area of Manorville, stuffed into plastic bags, wrapped with duct tape. More than a decade later, additional remains were found along Ocean Parkway near Gilgo Beach, linking her case to the others. On paper, Rex Heuermann looked just like another New Yorker, a husband, a father, an architect with a steady job and a quiet home in Massapequa Park. Each day he commuted to Manhattan, his office just steps from the Empire State Building. But behind that ordinary facade, prosecutors allege was something far more sinister.
Rex Heuermann was an architect who had his own firm in Midtown Manhattan. That's a prestigious sort of job. And he was known as an expediter, someone who could get building permits if you wanted to do renovations on a historic building or improve your condo.
He was married. He has a biological daughter who worked with him at his architecture office, and he has a special needs son, stepson. He was a member of social clubs, networking clubs, hunting clubs. If you ask his neighbors, I'm sure some would say he's nice and normal. Some would say he's odd, like anyone. But he, on paper, had created a very artfully not alarming double life.
One thing we noticed early on was that even though this guy was an architect, his house was sort of ramshackle. It was not kept in good shape. You know, all the houses surrounding it had pristine lawns and the shutters were nice and good paint jobs.
And then you learn that it's his childhood home and that his mother lived there until he bought it from her. And then you start to really understand some of the large psychological components that are probably at play here. It's not normal for an architect to be living in a house with the front porch caving in and being held up by 2x4s.
So how did investigators connect Heuermann to one of the most infamous unsolved serial murder cases in the country? The answer lies in years of painstaking work, advances in technology, a re-examined case file, and one break that changed everything.
When the indictment was first announced on July 14th, 2023, this 33-page affidavit was released to the media. And it was jaw-dropping because it gave a lot of details about how they managed to arrest Rex Heuermann.
There were always questions about what evidence might law enforcement have, what might have been salvageable from the remains, because again, they were left along Ocean Parkway for years prior to their discovery. So there were always questions about, do they have hair? Do they have DNA that could tie these remains to a suspect? And it turns out that yes, they did. They had several hairs that they were able to pull from the victims, and they found female hairs and male hairs. So what they needed to do next was collect a surreptitious DNA sample from Rex Heuermann and his female family members to see if DNA testing would confirm that they were a match. So they start following him in order to collect DNA samples to do just that.
They waited outside his house. They wanted to get DNA from bottles that were thrown out. So they did swabs of the bottles outside his house. And then the last thing they did of note was they retrieved a pizza box from outside his job in Manhattan. He had left a crust in the pizza box along with a napkin, and they swabbed that, and there was a close match to Rex Heuermann's DNA, the DNA that was found at one of the crime scenes.
They did the same thing for his daughter. They retrieved a Monster energy drink can after following her on the train.
Some of the hairs that were found belonged to his wife, according to DNA testing. Initially, it was mitochondrial DNA, which is usually the maternal line of your family. But later on, it came out that these hairs were tested for nuclear DNA. At least 3 of the hairs were connected by scientists to Rex Heuermann's wife. And initially, we heard that Amber Costello had a hair on her body that was connected to his daughter, Victoria. And later, when there were other victims added to superseding indictments, we found that another hair from his daughter, when she was only a toddler, was found on a victim from the year 2000. So it's pretty sensational when you consider that 3 members of the same family had hairs allegedly found on these multiple victims.
The arrest of Rex Heuermann stunned the public, but even more shocking was the mountain of evidence prosecutors say ties him to the Gilgo Beach murders.
Police made a lot of very interesting findings during the search of this house on First Avenue in Massapequa Park.
Fortunately for law enforcement, Rex Heuermann also appears to be very much a hoarder. If you look at photos of this home, there are boxes packed with items stuffed in every single room.
There was this huge vault in the basement, a cement-lined vault, and it had more than 280 guns of all different sizes. There were long guns, there were Glocks, and not all of them were registered. And they were Rex Heuermann's. Also, there was this sort of secret room, and police didn't know what the significance of that room was.
There were over 300 electronic devices seized during the 2 searches of Heuermann's home. Multiple cell phones were found, hard drives, disks, old computers.
Ultimately, those devices contained a treasure trove of information.
He had multiple email addresses tied to multiple burner cell phones and multiple fake Tinder accounts using fake names. So he really spun like a web of communication that he attempted to conceal, Rex Heuermann's name to any of these digital devices. But what he failed to recognize was that his internet IP address would be tied to these things, would be tied to the email addresses. Had he never connected to his home Wi-Fi or his office Wi-Fi, he may have at least succeeded a little bit in covering some of this up. We also had surveillance evidence of him putting minutes on one of these burner phones, which also led law enforcement to believe that he may be gearing up to murder once again.
We later learned that one of the devices had this document that Rex Heuermann allegedly tried to erase. But because the DA had forensic extractors who could really work on the computer and try to retrieve deleted information, one of the biggest finds in the electronic device was this document that the district attorney said was a blueprint for murder.
The HK 2002-04 document was discovered in the unallocated space on the hard drive. When a user deletes data, many users believe the file has been purged forever. However, deleting a file only tells the computer that the space previously occupied by that file is now available. The deleted data will remain in unallocated space until another file is written over it. Data contained within unallocated space can be retrieved via a computer forensic extraction method called file carving. The HK 2002-04 document is believed to be a planning document utilized by Heuermann to methodically blueprint and plan out his kills. 4 categories: problems, believed to be a guide on issues to avoid apprehension; supplies needed to carry out the serial murders; DS or dump site; and TRG or target. 3 other categories: pre-prep, a guide on steps to take in advance of a murder, inspecting his vehicle, engaging the target, conducting recon, checking for surveillance cameras, even checking the weather. 1 entitled prep, steps taken closer in time to the murder, setting up a staging area, a holding area, building a table, and then post-event. Checklists of tasks following a murder to avoid apprehension: destroy files, change tires, burn gloves, dispose of pics, and have a story set. Further categories include recon reports, take down/pick up, including things like remember, don't charge gas. 1 subject entitled body prep, with things such as wash body, remove trace DNA, remove ID marks, tattoos, remove head and hands, package for transport. Another entitled dispose of following, including tools and devices, clothes and personal items, props, toys, wood items. what you wore, computer files, burned gloves. And then things to remember. Get sleep before hunt. Too tired creates problems. Hit harder. Hit to the face next time for takedown. Use heavy rope for neck. Light rope broke under stress of being tightened. And then under a section entitled Notes, specific page references to the book Mindhunter by John Douglas concerning the criminal profiling of serial killers. As the case against Rex Heuermann moves toward trial, the legal battle is already underway. Heuermann maintains his innocence and his defense team has come out swinging. In a now failed attempt to exclude the nuclear DNA evidence from trial, Heuermann's attorneys argued the DNA analysis relied on by prosecutors is not widely accepted in the scientific community.
The evidence found on the remains, they were rootless hairs. Now, up until very recently, there wasn't a whole lot that could be done with rootless hairs. You could basically extract narrowing kind of information from rootless hairs, but in order to have a conclusive DNA match using a rootless hair, they had to turn to some very new technology in DNA analysis. And basically what law enforcement did is they started working with a lab in California called Estrella Labs. And they have this groundbreaking method of extracting nuclear DNA from rootless hairs. And that's what they did. Now, when Rex Heuermann was charged, the first thing his attorney, Michael Brown, attempted to do was to get this nuclear DNA evidence thrown out based on the fact that this type of DNA testing has not been used in criminal court before. It is commonly used when we're talking about things like medical DNA testing and identifying unknown remains. They use this DNA technology a lot to identify the remains of soldiers in war and things like that. So it's very scientifically accepted. But Rex Heuermann's attorney tried to argue that because it has not been used in a court case, there's no precedent for it, so he wanted it excluded.
On September 3rd, 2025, Judge Timothy Massey issued the long-awaited decision from Heuermann's Fry hearing, a mini trial that tests whether a method is generally accepted within the scientific community. Judge Massey ruled that the disputed DNA evidence could be admitted at trial, citing expert testimony, peer-reviewed studies, and its use in other states like California and Idaho. The defense quickly filed a new motion claiming the evidence violated New York public health law, which bars for-profit labs from submitting evidence in criminal cases. That motion was denied on September 23rd. Heuermann's defense team also sought to split the case into multiple trials, with attorney Michael Brown arguing his client risked an improper conviction from the cumulative effect of the evidence. He also pointed to disparities in some of the deaths, including different time frames, killing methods, and body disposal locations. Prosecutors countered that the victims are inextricably interwoven through geography, victimology, forensic evidence, and Heuermann's own planning document. On September 23rd, Judge Massey ruled the case will move forward as a single trial. As of the time of this recording, a trial date has not been set, but he gave the defense until January 13th to file additional pretrial motions after receiving the remaining discovery, which includes a 723-page inventory, a list of more than 7,000 people who, quote, may have evidence or information relevant to the charges or potential defense, and a list of expert witnesses. Heuermann is due back in court on January 2026. Even with Rex Heuermann now charged with 7 murders, the story remains incomplete. A total of 10 sets of Heuermann remains have been discovered along Gilgo Beach, and several of those cases remain unsolved, with no one yet held accountable.
There are 10 victims that are commonly associated with this case, even if Rex Heuermann has not been charged with them. And one of the earlier ones is a victim we now know to be Tanya Jackson. And before her name was Tanya Jackson, she was known as Peaches for a really, really long time because her torso, which was found in Nassau County in Hempstead Lake State Park, was known because it had a large peach tattoo. Now, her appendages were later found on Ocean Parkway near the other victims, and her toddler was found near Valerie Mack.
Authorities said they have identified the father of the child, describing him as cooperative. Although he did not report the two missing, investigators said that Jackson's relationship with many people was estranged, including her own family. And since she was traveling with the military, it is possible that she was not expected to be reported missing for a long time. Tanya and Tatiana were buried together in Alabama with full military honor. Another unidentified victim, referred to by investigators as Asian Doe, was discovered in April 2011, according to DA Ray Tierney. The victim was a biological male of Asian descent, estimated to be between 17 and 23 years old, and was found wearing women's clothing. Investigators believe the victim died in 2006 or earlier from blunt force trauma, though their remains weren't discovered until April 4th of 2011. Authorities believe the victim may have spent time in New York City and possibly engaged in sex work prior to their death.
There have always been question marks surrounding this victim, not only because they're unidentified still, but the MO completely deviates here. This victim was murdered as a result of blunt force trauma. The race is different than the other victims. So there has been confusion about whether or not this victim is connected, but largely most people believe that yes, they are.
Then there's Shannan Gilbert, the woman whose disappearance brought police to Gilgo Beach in the first place. Her body was found over a year later in a nearby marsh.
The attorney hired by Shannan's family and how vocal Shannan's mother was is a large reason why pressure remained on law enforcement to solve this serial killer case. However, immediately after Shannan's remains were found, Suffolk County Police Department stated that they believe Shannan's death was the result of what they call misadventure, that they believe she succumbed to death as a result of, natural causes. Maybe some drugs were involved, they speculated.
But an independent autopsy conducted by former New York Chief Medical Examiner Michael Bodden concluded there is no evidence that she died of a natural disease, of a drug overdose, or of drowning. There is insufficient information to determine a definitive cause of death, but the autopsy findings are consistent with homicidal strangulation, Bodden wrote in the report released in 2016. Gilbert's family has never wavered in their belief that she was murdered. As Rex Heuermann's case makes its way to trial, the questions remain. Are there more victims? And if there are, will justice ever reach them? The case of the Long Island serial killer has always been more than a murder mystery. For more than a decade, it symbolized something deeper: failure of institutions, a lack of urgency, and the dangerous consequences of dismissing vulnerable victims.
This case is a microcosm for problems in all investigations, marginalization of certain groups, and for women in particular, violence against women.
There have been other serial killers on Long Island, and one of them, Joel Rifkin, ended up confessing to killing 17 women, and they were sex workers as well, because what often would happen, or at least was perceived by people who did this, was that, they're sex workers, no one will try to find them, or no one will file a missing persons report. But that was not the case here. The families filed reports. They wanted their daughters respected. They wanted their cases solved. And it finally happened that there was an arrest.
I think the takeaway is just there's no one who's going to get away with crimes of this magnitude. And I think it's really a relief to everybody to know that evil is not going to prevail here.
For years, the women at the center of this case were treated as footnotes, dismissed, ignored, and dehumanized. As the case against Rex Heuermann moves forward, so does the fight to uncover the full truth, because until every victim is named and every voice is heard, this story is not finished. Heuermann has pled not guilty to all charges, but the evidence continues to grow, and with it, the hope that the full scope of what happened along Gilgo Beach will finally come to light. Thank you for joining me for this special presentation of Courtroom Confidential Case Notes. If you haven't already, please take a moment to like and subscribe, and check out our Case Notes playlist for other in-depth episodes like this.